Before, I guess on the West Coast it's called whisper listings, and we've heard of pocket listings if you're a member of the real estate community, and more recently we hear the term off-MLS. Can you give us a description of what we're speaking about here?
I'd be glad to, Pat. Really that off-MLS term came kind of trying to get some clarity within the industry, because as you're saying, there's a lot of acronyms out there, whether it be whisper listings, pocket listings, off-market listings. In reality, if you've got a property that's not on the multiple listing, you're not whispering about it, it's not in your pocket, and it's not off the market.
Sure.
It may have a single property website, you may be broadcasting at a networking meeting, you may very well have a sign in the yard. So it's none of those three. It's just off the MLS. So you've got kind of a gap in the marketing package or exposure package for the property.
Now, before the internet, when it was off MLS, it was off the radar. But now the agents have social media, and there's also Craigslist. There's all sorts of ways to get the word out.
True.
For that individual agent to sell the property.
Oh, very true. And actually, if you think in terms of the term pocket listings, that's where it came from. Because prior to there being an MLS, you would walk around with your best listings in your pocket. And if I came across you and I decided it's one I wanted to share, I took it out of my pocket. And if I didn't want to share it with you, I didn't. Henceforth, the term pocket listing. But what's happening now is there's so many means of exposure for a property. Certainly the internet, the syndication of those properties, and broadcasting out through multiple websites, multiple portals. You've got the intranet sites within specific real estate companies. You've got networking groups that have created their own web platforms and ways to trade that information back and forth.
Right. Now, Dave, you are really active with the real estate community. We have large real estate firms here in the Bay Area. And if an agent sells one of their listings to another agent across town under the same firm, that's still a dual agency sale, correct?
Operating under the same broker's license.
Okay. So can you describe for the lay people what a dual agency, what it looks like in today's world?
Well, it would look like one agent representing both the seller and the buyer. In the classic, I am a dual agent. I'm representing literally one individual representing both sides.
Okay.
Or as you can have one agent within a company operating under a broker's license, and another agent within that office can also then represent another party to the transaction, which would be another form of dual agency. And then lastly, as you've already mentioned, where you have larger companies with multiple offices, such as Robert's office, you conceivably have agents bringing in offers on listings that the company already has.
Okay. So now we have the off-MLS or pocket listings issue. With to the other side of that is dual agency. So Robert, can you speak about how the dual agency marries into the pocket listing issue?
Well, I think, simply put, if you're acting as somebody's fiduciary, then you've kind of charged with the responsibility of representing their interests as though they were your own. So anything you're doing in a real estate transaction, that has to be paramount. That's got to be your focus. And a concern may be is if a property is not being marketed through the MLS, is that truly in one's best interest from a fiduciary standpoint? And could it give rise to an increase in the number of dual agency transactions, where you're just trading information inside the company? So that would be the concern that would come up. Now, whether or not that statistically bears out over time and over through the market trends, we have to wait and see.
Now, Dave, I grew up in the business where once I have a listing, I spend some time preparing the property for the marketplace, working with the sellers. Then we have the broker tour, which is an open house on a weekday morning. And then we would have the open house Saturday, Sunday, and some newspaper ads. And then hopefully we get some offers Tuesday, Wednesday. Now, when that's on the multiple listing service, doing the full service. Now with a pocket listing or off MLS, that is where supposedly the seller has declined to put it on the multiple listing service.
And the primary issue is whether they have made a full and informed decision to do so,
right,
with knowledge of all the relevant and pertinent facts that they need to to decide how to best expose their property to achieve their goals.
Okay. Now, I heard Robert's speech at the National Association of Realtors last fall, and there was a California Association of Realtors attorney that opened the forum, and she spoke about that conversation that you mentioned should be very robust about all the pros and cons of putting a property on the market or on the multiple listing service. Do you have anything to add about what an agent or a homeowner might be looking at?
Well, Robert's already mentioned that you're representing somebody. You are in a fiduciary relationship with that party.
Okay, for the lay people out there, what fiduciary relationship? What is?
Well, fundamentally, it means putting the interests of your client ahead of yourself. Number one, it's performing your job competently. It's being truthful, fair, honest to your client and to fellow licensees. And then, in addition, it's essentially putting yourself in the shoes of your client and trying to determine what choices, what decisions, what follow-up would best serve the interests of your client. And that's where potentially the issue of off-MLS listings comes into play. We have not seen in Northern California, in this geographic area, a lot of litigation as of this point, on this subject. Robert, I think there's one case or two that arose out of Southern California that have been discussed, or at least mentioned, but that's where the issue lies, is whether or not the agent has performed their fiduciary responsibilities for their client so that the client has made a full and informed decision. Okay. And there's a lot of statistical data that I know Robert is extremely familiar with that relates to that decision-making choice in terms of have they actually and will they actually gain the highest price and through the most or broadest based exposure. And there's all sorts of discussions and decisions and choices that are made. As an industry, we've tried to come up with advisories, we've tried to come up with waivers that need to be signed, as a requirement of the MLS, but it still boils down to that discussion and that decision and the rationale, for that taking place.
So, Robert, I remember years ago when Ron Rossi, when you were a partner, I was on their committee doing checklists for real estate agents, and at the same time I had an agent that I knew. She was basically bragging about selling dual agency, representing the buyer and seller on a house up in the foothills, and that she sold it herself before the multiple listing service, before it went on the market. And I thought, wow, that's not something I'd brag about. 6 months later, I'm at a committee with Ron Rossi, and he's talking about he has a case where it was the same property. The seller sold their home, thought they did okay, and 6 months later, neighbors say, hey, did you hear the Jones sold their house too, and sold it for a lot more money. So then the homeowner that left the neighbor is thinking, I sold it too low. Why is that? Well, they didn't do the broker tour and the open house and newspaper ads and do full exposure. So this was a case, I believe that might have been before the internet, but this is the same situation where if you don't go out there and expose it, the agent might get in some trouble down the road. And the seller could be leaving money on the table.
Well, very true. I mean, it just, we live between Santa Cruz and Monterey County, where Dave and I reside, in Santa Clara County, and up the peninsula here. We live in one of the most fluid real estate markets in the country, where prices are changing, the market trends are changing dramatically and at a very fast pace. And so that can always be a risk of that happening, where you're not getting something full enough exposure, but even if you are, you may, the buyer A for this property may achieve a better value than what happens next week on property B.
Right.
But the real key there, Pat, that you bring up is by maximizing the exposure of a property, whether it's in a good market or a slow market. By maximizing the exposure of that property, you maximize the potential number of purchasers, and you maximize the potential for achieving the highest possible price. And that's really our goal in acting as somebody's fiduciary in the marketing of their home certainly is to accomplish what their desires are, but ultimately that's going to be the highest possible price in the shortest period of time with the fewest number of problems. You do that by maximizing your exposure.
And that was the real estate attorney that you spoke with at the National Association of Realtors from California Association of Realtors. She spoke about it's a good risk management tool, Dave, for the real estate agent to use the multiple listing service and the broker tour and whatnot, so that he or she can demonstrate that they did all that they had, all the tools that they had available to get the business.
It certainly is going to eliminate a potential argument that as a result of a lack of exposure, I did not achieve the highest price. There can be issues about the actual marketing effort and whether or not a plan was set up and whether that plan was met. And I think the other issue that does come up in these situations is what was the seller's motivation, allegedly, for not exposing it to the market. And I've had some cases where dual agency has been involved, and essentially they were in-house deals, and the situation was there's always a story that the agent is going to tell, and whether the seller acknowledges that, the pressures that the seller may or may not be under from a time standpoint, from a monetary standpoint. You hear about privacy concerns, but most privacy concerns can be addressed, through a tailored marketing program.
Right. Now let's speak about that tailored marketing program. For instance, we've always had, for instance, there's somebody home that's ill or in hospice, or they're a famous individual. In order to mitigate having strangers to come to their house or having it turn into a store location, so to speak, what are some of the tools that we can do? Take the lockbox off, go appointment only, have the listing agent show?
Well, there's a number of ways you can stylize the marketing plan to reflect somebody's specific wishes. You said there's privacy issues, there might be the health issues, there's any number of those that may occur, but those are all manageable within the scope of still having full marketing of the property. Those are all manageable while maximizing the exposure of that property through the multiple listing service, through marketing, through advertising. And Pat, to that point, I think that we have seen obviously a growth in the number of properties that are starting their marketing off the MLS over the past several years, and it either coincidentally or not coincided with an improvement in the real estate market coming out of the recession that we faced. And two of the largest arguments that we continue to hear as to why a property is going to start off the MLS or have off-MLS marketing is going to be privacy and security. Well, if you think in terms of the market getting better, and at the same time the percentage of properties that are starting off the MLS going up dramatically at the same time, I've said to many people that privacy and security obviously became a greater issue as the market got better. When the market was soft, we weren't nearly as concerned about our privacy and security. We needed to maximize the exposure.
Okay, that's exactly right. Now, the other way I explained it is during the Great Recession, I would have agents stop me at a real estate board function or something and describe a listing that they had, and if I would show it and sell it. I was being pitched listings during the Great Recession. All of a sudden, the flood of inventory recedes, and we have very few homes for sale. And now many agents are not speaking about their listings. They're selling it privately, in-house, or by themselves, and not sharing it with their colleagues. So, and there's fewer paychecks out there for the real estate community, and now they're deciding perhaps I can sell it myself. So it seems to me agent-driven.
Well, I would have to agree with
Right.
you there. That most of this is industry driven, if not specific
Okay.
agent driven, and you certainly are seeing. You're talking about the in-house transaction or the double-ended transaction.
The off-MLS.
There's also a lot of agents out there within networking groups or within clusters of agents that they know specialize in a particular area, and they're saying, well, we're going to channel that property just towards this specific group of agents because they would be most likely to have the buyer. The problem with that concept is we don't know who has the buyer for a particular listing.
Right.
Dave may have the best buyer for your listing, but if you're not exposing it to Dave, if he's not aware that it's on the market, then not only does his buyer miss out on an opportunity there, but your seller may miss out on an opportunity to maximize the value or maximize the return on that home.
Right, okay. For the viewers that just tuned in, Dave, we're speaking about off-MLS listings, sellers that have their home for sale, and it's not on the multiple listing service. And by the way, we have 15,000 members on our local multiple listing service. And once we put it on the multiple listing service, it automatically goes to 85 websites, real estate websites, and continues to auto-populate. Okay? So speaking about that exposure, Dave, in terms of how that, let's speak about that robust conversation. It seems to me during the Great Recession or the dot-com crash, agents were telling at the kitchen table where they're selling, listen, we have to clean this house up, we have to have it ready for show, we're going to have an open house Saturday, Sunday, we have to have your dog stay at your uncle's, and all these systems were in place to get the house ready to sell. All of a sudden, we turn into a buyer's market, and now the agent's saying, you don't want a bunch of looky-loos through your house, do you? You don't want to go through all this hassle, right? Well, I tell you what this is what it's worth. What if I bring you this offer?
As I said earlier, it's
Right.
all in the dialogue that takes place,
The dialogue.
and you got to remember that in terms of whether a fiduciary obligation has been met, you've got a number of different factors. You've got factors such as the pressure or the circumstances that seller is facing. You've got the sophistication of the seller. So, for example, I mean, Robert and I might have a little tougher, argument that we didn't understand the ramifications of a selection, were we to make it. You've got the questions that are asked. You've got the nature of the property. So there are issues, and rarely do you see a written paper trail, that
About that robust
even in our
conversation.
world of electronic communication, that
Because-
conversation is rarely documented.
That's true.
And Robert, you've been president of our association, California Association of Realtors,
I was, yes,
Okay.
2002.
and you worked your way up. You manage with, I guess did you take over your dad's office? Your brothers run it?
My brother Paul and I own a Bailey Properties in Santa Cruz, and so we
Right.
started with our dad in
Yeah,
1974.
that's right. Okay.
Um,
So you've been around agents and training agents a long time.
Mhm.
Okay, so there's that conversation to take care of their sellers, and you know as well as I do. And I've sat down with people, very sophisticated people, multiple degrees. They are an expert, top of the game in their field. But when it comes to realtors, they just say, "Hey, listen, you tell me." Oftentimes they tell the realtor or the agent, "What's the best way to go? Whatever you say, I'll do it." So, and that's a situation, that fragile area, that if we don't have to put it on the market and I get my price, I'm fine. So for the seller, right? So it's for the agents viewing this interview, that they need to really think twice about steering that seller down one road versus the other.
Well, I think Dave has touched on the fully informed decision. And then making sure that you've had that conversation with your client, making sure that you've memorialized that conversation with your client. And both the California Association of Realtors, more than just the California Association of Realtors, PRDS, the forms company for the Silicon Valley Association of Realtors, and MLS Listings Inc., our regional multiple listing service, have all created, for lack of a term, an MLS waiver form.
Right.
That is intended to assist the agent in having their client make an informed decision. So it does kind of go through the different areas. you're going to, by keeping your property off the MLS, it may not be exposed to all the agents in the marketplace. It may not be exposed to the broadest pool of buyers. It will not be syndicated to the major websites. So all of those are built into that disclosure, and it calls for a different set of initials. So the intent was, from the industry standpoint, was to prompt that dialogue to protect the client and to protect the agent in the transaction, to the point of I know with the one for MLS listings, you can even elect, I think you made a comment a minute ago that once it goes in the MLS, it goes out to 85 different websites. Well, even that is at the direction or choice of the seller and the broker.
Right.
So if a seller has a concern about their property being overexposed or pictures being out on the internet, which you cannot retrieve, you can elect to have that property exposed just through the multiple listing service, just through to their subscribers and participants, and not go out to any external site, even to any individual broker site. So you can get full exposure to those 15,000 realtors that you were speaking of and agents that you were speaking of, while not having it kind of ripple out to all the other sites.
And the other part about taking pictures of your house and showing where the windows are and things like that, you can just have one picture, the front of the house.
You can.
You could do that as well. Let's get into some of the stats. I know I've heard you speak about this. In 2011, this rise, we're coming out of the Great Recession. All of a sudden, the market's changing. There's this rise of off-MLS activity, almost 12% in 2011, 15% in 2012, 21% 2013. In the first quarter of this year, almost 20%. Now, in terms of the dollars, you have assembled this. Of course, you were on the chairman of the board of the MLS for those 3 years, watching this take place. And I heard you speak. You had mentioned that you didn't have to read about this in the newspapers. This was coming from the real estate community. This issue.
Yeah, the issue, and the reason that MLS listings took it on is because we were hearing from broker participants, we were hearing from the agents in the field that the integrity of our data was starting to slip, that they weren't able to access all the listings in the marketplace, that there was a trend developing towards off-MLS marketing, and asked us to dig into it and see whether or not this was a market-driven phenomena or a change in the business culture.
Right. Now, by the way, I was on that task force a year and a half ago. We had the conference calls, and I got back in touch with Myra and Jim over there at MLS, and had their staff put some numbers together for me. So I want to run these by you. But back to 2011, there was, of the multiple listing service, I think it's 9 Bay Area counties, or 5 Bay Area counties.
5 Bay Area counties.
5 Bay Area counties. In 2011, there was $2.5 billion in sales off MLS. 2012, $3.5 billion. 2013, almost $5 billion in sales. And the first quarter of this year, almost $1 billion.
Just under $1 billion.
Just under $1 billion. Now, by the way, can you describe how we quickly scrub the difference here? How do we do that?
Yeah,
find those numbers.
Simply put, Pat, what they're doing is comparing public records, public tax records, with our MLS records, and then scrubbing that for any duplicates where there may be, where there could be a miss in those records, taking out of there any family transfers. Okay. So trying to get as accurate as possible and looking for the arm's length transactions.
Okay, now this is where the real estate attorneys might come in handy a year or two from now. And I know Dave spoke about this, other attorneys saying, after some sort of issue in a real estate community, about 2 or 3 years later, we start to have visitors in your office, right? So in 2012, there was 2,700 off-MLS residential transactions that had a median selling price of $64,000 lower than homes on the MLS. The next year, in 2013, the off-MLS wave grew to a chart-topping, I added that there, 3,600 properties, which accounted for 105,000 lower median selling price compared to properties on the MLS.
There's a lot of statistical data, but we need a seller.
You need a seller to come in
We
and
need
say,
somebody to come forward and say, it's not that I sold it for what I was told it was worth. How much money did I actually leave on the table?
Yeah.
And the problem has been that there has not been a lot of sellers coming forward in that regard. Maybe they're not interested, maybe they're embarrassed, who knows, maybe they've moved on. But what generally happens, Pat, as you know, is that once a significant case is generated, even at a superior court or trial court level, then there may be some impact on the
that we're
industry.
okay.
And the other thing is, you've got potential fair housing issues, depending upon who is able to, learn about these properties, who is actually exposed to them. You've got code of ethics issues. Again, a lot depends, obviously, on the discussion that took place and what was said.
Okay, you heard it. David Hamerslough, thank you for watching tonight. MLS, Off-MLS. Pat Kapowich, thank you, Robert.
Thank you, Pat.
We will see you next week. Thanks again.